Hi everyone, it's Zoe from Book Reviews with Zoe. Excuse the messy hair, it's been really wet in Victoria. So humidity. So let's get into my September reading wrap up and see what books I read in September. So I actually read surprisingly quite a few books for Bookoplathon and Make Me Read, which Bookoplathon was hosted by Becca and the Books and Make Me Read was hosted by Earl Grey Books. And so let's get into them. I read this book, which I started ages ago and finally finished it, which is The Grandest Bookshop in the World by Amelia Mello, an Australian author, middle grade. It's based on a real life bookstore that was in a arcade in Melbourne in 1893, called Coles Books. It was a very famous bookstore that no longer exists. I think it disappeared probably in like 1920 or something. But it's a bit of historical fiction for children, but also fantasy and stuff like that. So it's like the only real element is to the fact that there was a real bookstore in Melbourne. But I really enjoyed it. It was surprisingly dark. It was good, but dark, But it made me really, really want to go to the bookstore, even though I can't. It would make me want to go back in time and read so it was really good fun. So the next one I read was the first book in by India Holton, which is the Wisteria Society. With the Wisteria Society, Lady of Scandals. I absolutely adored this book. It was nice and thin, a quick read. I absolutely loved the Bronte elements in it. So at the start of each chapter, it's got sort of Bronte inspired stuff through the book, and also gives you a little summary of what the chapter is going to be like at the start. So it's really clever. So much so that I'm going to be reading the second one in October. It's a really good. This has been pictured as sort of a Regency romance kind of thing, and there actually wasn't that much romance in it. It was more a pirate fantasy with a little bit of romance in it. So if you're more of a fantasy reader, I recommend this one. If you're more of a romance reader, you might be a bit disappointed because there's not really that much romance in it. But I really, really enjoyed it. The next one I read was Cinderella is Dead by Kathleen Barron, which was their first novel. I had read This Poison Heart earlier this year and I really, really enjoyed it. I absolutely loved this book. I know some people didn't like it. They thought it was some people thought it needed a little bit more, but I actually really, really liked it. I actually really liked the twist on the Cinderella story, in that it wasn't really a Cinderella story. It was sort of the what if 200 years later. And I really enjoyed the sort of dystopian element of the world, and it was also just a really reflection on, I suppose, society's expectations of women as well, and also of the diverse community, especially women and queer community and bi community, neurodiverse community, all of those communities. It really made a really good reflection on that sort of stuff, and sort of made you sort of think that society could actually scarily go down this path. So if certain things happened, it sort of made me think that way. So I really enjoyed it. So then I decided to reread Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. because the TV series was coming out. I enjoyed it as much as the first time. Yeah, it was good. It was a good read. It's not literary masterpiece, and there is still some you sort of go, oh, yeah, okay. But it's still a really good read. So much so that I will eventually continue the series, and I'm enjoying the TV series, so they've done really well with the TV series. And then the next one I read was Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake. I read my first ever Ashley Herring Blake book earlier this year, which was Delia Green. This is Ashley Herring Blake's middle grade book. I absolutely loved this book. It was just adorable. It was just like a rainbow that you would hug, and it was just beautiful, and it was just I could see why people rave about this book, and it was just it was just a big bear hug. It was good. Then the next one I read was Forest of Souls by Laurie M. Lee. This was good. I enjoyed it. It was a relatively quick read, but I just felt like it was a little bit, I suppose for me, I felt like, as I read a lot of fantasy, I just felt like there was a little bit like, the female character was really, really strong, but the world building wasn't so good, and I have an issue with spiders, and there was a Spider King in here, so I didn't particularly like that element as well. So overall, I enjoyed it, but will I continue this series? Probably not. Maybe if it's available in my library, yeah. Then I also read a reread, which was Sabriel by Garth Nix. This is the 25th anniversary edition that came out in Australia. Loved it. I love Garth Nix and his books. This series was a series that I absolutely loved. And it's the first book, and I've just forgotten how good Sabriel as a female character is, and the sort of like the necromancy in it and all those sort of things. Like it's a really good YA read, and probably more on the earlier side of YA because of when it was written. However, it's still as good as 25 years ago. So if you haven't read Garth Nix's Sabriel series, then I recommend reading it. So yeah. And then the next book I read was Time's Convent by Deborah Harkness. This is a prequel to the All Souls trilogy, which I finished reading. I enjoyed it, but I also felt like, what's the point of this book? In that I find it was interesting getting a bit more of an interesting view on the Claremont's world and life before All Souls trilogy, but also at the same time I just didn't really care, and it was good, but I just loved the original trilogy, and I just felt like, why do we have a prequel? It was a perfectly good trilogy. So yeah. And then I read Dark and Hollow Star by Ashley Hollingsworth. I really actually like this book. It's promoted as like a cross between Mortal Instruments and what's that series? Is it like Cruel Prince series? I haven't read the Cruel Prince series. I don't actually know what that's like, but I've started reading the Mortal Instruments series. I did really enjoy the urban element of Toronto, I think it was, setting. And it was just sort of like, it was just done really well. Like, it was sort of like, I just enjoyed the fantasy read. It wasn't high fantasy, and it wasn't, it just was a good YA fantasy, urban fantasy set in that's got fairies and, you know, all those sort of things, and an underworld and a city. It was just good fun. So overall, I enjoyed it. So they were all the books that I read in September. Overall, it was a really, really good month. I really enjoyed it. Somehow I read quite a few books. I don't know how that happened, but that's fine. It probably did happen when I had a 4-day long weekend, which is a plus, which I don't think I'm going to be able to read that many this month in October. However, I really, really enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun participating in the book-off-a-thon again, and also had really fun doing make me read polls on Twitter. That was a lot of fun, and hopefully Earl Grey Books does another one because that was a lot of fun. Yeah, so if you got this far in this video, like this video, leave a dice roll in the comments and subscribe to this channel. That would be fabulous, and I'll see you all later.